In a quiet corner of the United States, nestled among sprawling green forests and vast meadows, there stood a small house. It was simple, with a wooden porch and a view of the endless horizon. The house belonged to Jackson, a young man of 24 years, who had always been different from others. While his peers were content with simple routines, Jackson was drawn to the wilderness. He had long dreamed of becoming a biologist, though for now, his life revolved around a modest job in a local fishing supplies store. He worked hard, but his heart belonged to nature. One summer morning, Jackson decided to embark on one of his regular hikes through the nearby forests. The forest was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the noise of the world and immerse himself in the serenity of the wild. He enjoyed observing animals, capturing their behavior with his camera, and studying their interactions with the environment. As he walked along the well-trodden path, he noticed something unusual. Through the thick underbrush, he spotted a small skunk, its black and white fur blending with the shadows of the trees. The creature looked vulnerable and harmless, completely unaware of the presence of a human. Jackson was drawn to it, his curiosity piqued, but as he took a few cautious steps forward, he was distracted by a sound, a child's voice calling out from behind him. He turned around and saw a young boy running towards him. The boy, around 10 years old, had long golden hair and bright, eager eyes. His name was Sammy, and he wore a broad smile on his face, as if he had just made an incredible discovery. "Look, Jackson, I found a toy!" Sammy shouted with excitement, pointing at the skunk. Jackson's heart sank. Sammy, in his innocence, thought of the skunk as nothing more than a playful object, a new toy to take home. But Jackson knew better. A skunk was no toy. It was a wild animal that belonged in its natural habitat. "Sammy, don't get too close," Jackson warned, his voice firm but gentle. "That's not a toy. It's a wild animal. It could hurt you." Sammy, however, was undeterred. He dropped to his knees and reached out, attempting to catch the skunk. Jackson rushed to him, grabbing his arm just in time. "Listen, Sammy," Jackson said, his tone serious. "This is not a game. Animals like this are not for playing with. You can't just take them home. They have a life here in the wild, and it's not safe for them to live with people." Sammy, still unsure of what Jackson was trying to convey, looked at the skunk with wide eyes. The animal, sensing the danger, began to scurry away, vanishing into the brush. Sammy watched it go, a frown forming on his face. "But it's just so cute," Sammy said softly. "I thought it would make a great pet." Jackson knelt down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know, Sammy," he said. "It's easy to see animals and think of them like toys, but the truth is, they're not. They belong in the wild, where they can be free. If we take them from their home, we disrupt their lives." Sammy was silent for a moment, his young mind processing the new information. He had never thought of it that way before. His gaze followed the skunk as it disappeared, and he suddenly felt a sense of respect for the creature that hadn't been there before. "I understand," Sammy finally said, nodding slowly. "I didn't realize. I'm sorry." Jackson smiled, relieved to see that Sammy was beginning to understand. He stood up and brushed the dirt from his knees. "Nature is a fragile thing, Sammy. Every animal, every plant, every tree has its role to play in the world. We have to respect that. We can help protect it, but we can't take it for granted." Sammy looked up at Jackson, his face serious for a moment, as if he had just learned a valuable lesson. He then grinned. "I guess I'll stick to my action figures from now on," Sammy said with a chuckle. Jackson laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "That sounds like a good plan." They both stood there for a moment, watching the forest in silence. The world around them seemed a little quieter now, as if it too was contemplating the lesson that had just been learned. Jackson knew that Sammy's understanding wouldn't come all at once, but this was a start. He was beginning to see the world around him not just as a place to play, but as something worth protecting. As they walked back home, Jackson took a deep breath, appreciating the fresh air. He was grateful for moments like this, moments that allowed him to teach, to guide, and to help others understand the delicate balance of nature. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the path as Jackson, Sammy, and Sammy's mother, Laura, walked back home. The quiet of the forest surrounded them, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional chirp of a bird high in the branches. Laura was waiting for them on the porch of their small house. She had been gardening earlier in the day and looked up with concern as Jackson and Sammy approached. She had heard snippets of their conversation about the skunk, but she could see that something had shifted in Sammy's expression. "Is everything all right?" Laura asked, her voice soft but filled with worry. "Sammy, did you get too close to that animal?" Sammy, looking slightly sheepish, shook his head. "No, Mom. Jackson explained everything to me. It's not a toy. It's a real animal, and it belongs in the forest." Laura raised an eyebrow, clearly relieved, but still unsure of the details. Jackson stepped forward, offering a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine. Sammy learned an important lesson today, but we should take it a step further. I think we should return the skunk to its home. That way it's safe, and it can live the way it's supposed to." Laura nodded thoughtfully. She had always been supportive of Sammy's curiosity, but she was also aware of the importance of teaching him respect for nature. If he was going to grow up understanding the delicate balance of the environment, it was essential to show him what that meant through action, not just words. "You're right," she said after a moment, her voice firm with resolve. "Let's do it. We can return the skunk to its home. It's the right thing to do." They gathered their things: a small blanket to lay the skunk on if they found it, a simple basket in case they needed to carry it, and a first aid kit just in case something went wrong. As they drove toward the edge of the forest, Sammy sat quietly in the back seat, lost in thought. His mind was buzzing with questions, but he couldn't quite put them into words. He had never thought about animals the way Jackson had explained it. As they arrived at the edge of the forest, they parked the car and stepped out into the quiet, open space. The trees here were tall and dense, with thick underbrush and patches of sunlight that danced across the ground. Jackson led the way, with Sammy and Laura following closely behind. "Do you think the skunk is still here?" Sammy asked, his voice uncertain. "It might be," Jackson said. "Skunks are creatures of habit, and they tend to stick to familiar places. If we return it to the area where we found it, there's a good chance it'll find its way home." Sammy glanced at the ground, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. He had always been curious about animals, but he had never really thought about them beyond their cute appearances. Now he understood that there was more to them. They were part of something bigger, something that needed to be respected and protected. Jackson paused for a moment, scanning the area. "All right, this is the place," he said finally, pointing to a patch of dense bushes. "Let's set the skunk free here." They carefully placed the blanket on the ground, then positioned the basket in front of it. Sammy knelt down beside it, looking at Jackson for confirmation. Jackson gave him a nod of encouragement. "I'll take the skunk out gently, and we'll just leave it here. It should feel safe enough to stay, but if it runs away, that's okay. It's just trying to find its way back." With a gentle touch, Jackson opened the basket. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the breeze in the trees. Then, slowly, the small skunk emerged, its black and white fur shimmering in the light. It seemed confused at first, unsure of where it was, but as it looked around, it began to move cautiously, sniffing the ground. "Look, Sammy," Jackson whispered. "It's already adjusting. It knows where it is." Sammy watched in awe as the skunk waddled further into the underbrush, its tail held high. He could see the animal's caution, its innate understanding of the wild. It was home. Jackson stood up and looked at Sammy. "This is what respect for nature means, Sammy. It's about understanding that animals and plants are part of a much larger system. We can't just take them because we like them. We need to protect them." Sammy nodded slowly, his expression serious. He had always thought of nature as something to explore and enjoy, but he was starting to realize that it was more than just an amusement. It was a responsibility, too. They watched the skunk disappear into the trees, a small ripple in the quiet of the forest. Sammy stood there for a long moment, his thoughts swirling. He wanted to understand more, to know how to care for the creatures of the world, to make sure they were safe and protected. It wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about preserving the world around them. As they made their way back to the car, Sammy was quieter than usual. His mother noticed it, but she didn't press him for answers. She knew that he was processing something important. "Thank you for teaching me, Jackson," Sammy said, breaking the silence as they got into the car. Jackson smiled, his heart warming at the words. "It's not about me, Sammy. It's about you and how you see the world. If you can learn to respect nature, you'll be able to make a real difference." "I will," Sammy promised, his voice steady with newfound understanding. "I'll do my best to protect it." As they drove home, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sammy gazed out the window, deep in thought. The forest had given him a new perspective on the world, one that he would carry with him as he grew. He realized that respect for nature wasn't something that could be taught overnight, but it was a lesson that, once learned, would shape his life forever. The days following their return to the forest passed slowly, but the lessons Sammy had learned that afternoon lingered with him. The skunk, which had seemed like just another animal to catch and hold, had turned into something far more important. Sammy no longer saw the wilderness as a place to be conquered or tamed, but as a delicate world that needed to be respected and protected. This new perspective was not something that could be taught easily or quickly, but Sammy was starting to grasp its depth. Sammy spent more time outside now, wandering the woods behind his home, watching animals, and learning about the trees and plants around him. He asked Jackson questions about the creatures they had seen on their walks, how the birds built their nests, how the squirrels found food, and why certain flowers only bloomed in specific seasons. Jackson was happy to answer, but he also encouraged Sammy to find answers on his own, to observe and learn from nature itself. One afternoon, as Sammy was walking through the woods alone, he came across a patch of wildflowers growing in the shade of a cluster of oak trees. The flowers were small, but vibrant, with purple petals that caught the light just right. Sammy knelt down, studying them carefully. He remembered what Jackson had told him about how every plant, every animal, had a role to play in the ecosystem. "These flowers are here for a reason," Sammy muttered to himself. "They're part of something bigger. They help the bees and the bees help them. It's all connected." He smiled to himself, proud of his growing understanding. He had spent the past few days reading books about the local wildlife, learning about the different species that lived in the forests around his home. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When he returned home later that afternoon, he was eager to share what he had learned. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea when Sammy bounded in. "Mom, you should see the wildflowers behind the house. They're so beautiful," Sammy exclaimed. "I didn't realize how much there is to see in the woods." Laura smiled at his enthusiasm. She had always known that her son had a deep connection to nature, but she was glad to see him developing a greater respect for it. "That's wonderful, Sammy," she said, putting down her cup. "What made you so interested in wildflowers?" Sammy sat down beside her, his hands animated as he spoke. "Jackson taught me something important. He said everything in nature is connected, like how flowers help bees and bees help flowers. It's like a big team, and everything plays a part. I want to learn more about how things work together." Laura nodded thoughtfully. "That's a beautiful way to look at it. The more you learn about how nature works, the more you'll see that it's not just about individual plants and animals, but about the whole system, the balance that keeps everything thriving." Sammy nodded eagerly. He had always liked the idea of a team, of everyone working together for a common goal. Now, he was beginning to see the natural world in the same way. The next weekend, Jackson invited Sammy to join him and a few other local volunteers for a project to help maintain the health of the nearby forest. It wasn't a large-scale conservation effort, but it was an important one. Cleaning up trash, removing invasive species, and planting native plants where they were needed. Sammy was excited. This was a chance to put his newfound knowledge to use and make a real difference in the world. As they arrived at the site, Jackson introduced Sammy to a few of the other volunteers, mostly adults who were passionate about protecting the local wildlife. Among them was Erin, a young woman in her 30s who worked as a park ranger. She had a calm, focused demeanor and a wealth of knowledge about the local flora and fauna. Sammy quickly grew fond of her, as she had a way of explaining things that made them easy to understand, no matter how complex. "Okay, everyone," Erin called out to the group. "Let's get started. Today we're focusing on cleaning up this area and planting some native grasses to help restore the soil. Sammy, why don't you join me over here? I can show you how to properly plant a wildflower garden." Sammy eagerly nodded and followed Erin to a patch of bare ground, where they began digging small holes for the seeds. Erin explained the importance of native plants and how they provided food and shelter for local wildlife, from insects to larger animals like deer and rabbits. "These plants are suited to the local environment," Erin said, carefully placing a few seeds into the soil. "They don't require a lot of extra care, and they help maintain the balance of the ecosystem." As they worked, Sammy felt a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time, he was contributing to something bigger than himself. It wasn't just about collecting facts or learning trivia. It was about being a part of the process, helping the land that had given him so much joy. By the end of the day, they had planted dozens of wildflowers and grasses, cleared out debris, and even built a small bird bath to attract more wildlife to the area. Sammy's hands were dirty, and his muscles ached from the day's work, but he felt proud. He had done something good for the environment. As they packed up to leave, Jackson came over and clapped Sammy on the back. "Great job today," he said with a grin. You really helped out. Thanks, Jackson, Sammy replied, his face lighting up with a smile. I feel like I'm actually making a difference. You are, Jackson said. Every little bit counts, and the more you learn, the more you'll understand how much we all depend on the natural world. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Laura looked at Sammy with pride. How was your day? She asked. It was amazing, Sammy replied, his eyes wide with excitement. I learned so much about plants and how they help animals, and we planted a whole garden of wildflowers. Laura smiled, happy to see her son so passionate. I'm glad to hear that. It sounds like you're learning a lot, not just about nature, but about the importance of taking care of it. Sammy nodded, his mind still racing with everything he had learned. I want to do more. I want to help the environment every day. I want to protect the animals and the plants. They're all so important. Laura's heart swelled with pride. I'm proud of you, Sammy. You've grown so much. As they ate their dinner, Sammy sat quietly for a moment, deep in thought. He had learned so much in such a short time. But there was still more to discover, more to understand. And he was eager to keep learning, keep growing, and keep protecting the world around him. Weeks passed, and Sammy's connection to nature grew deeper with every passing day. The lessons he had learned about respect for the environment and the delicate balance of life were beginning to shape his worldview. He no longer saw the world as a series of isolated events. He saw it as an interconnected web, each thread holding an essential part of the whole. His growing passion for wildlife conservation began to define his daily life, and it seemed that his mind was always buzzing with new questions. One afternoon, after finishing his homework, Sammy grabbed his backpack and decided to visit Jackson. He had something he wanted to ask him, something that had been on his mind for a while. As he arrived at Jackson's house, he found him sitting on the porch, sipping a cold drink and enjoying the quiet of the late afternoon. The air was crisp, and the golden light of the setting sun made the trees glow with a warm hue. Sammy smiled as he approached, knowing that he was in the right place to get the answers he needed. Hey, Jackson! Sammy greeted him, sitting down beside him on the porch. Got a minute? Of course, Sammy, Jackson replied with a smile. What's on your mind? Sammy paused for a moment, then took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about what you've taught me, and about how we can help nature. But I keep wondering, how do we really make a difference? I mean, it feels like there's so much to fix. I want to do more, but it just feels so big. Where do we start? Jackson nodded, understanding the weight of Sammy's question. It was a question that many people, even adults, had struggled with at one point or another. How do you make a meaningful impact when the problem seems so vast? Well, Jackson began slowly, that's a really good question. The truth is, making a difference doesn't always have to be a huge, dramatic thing. It's about the little steps we take every day, like what you're doing now. You're learning, you're observing, and you're understanding. That's the first step. But what about the big stuff? Sammy asked, looking out at the landscape. What about the forests that are being destroyed, or the animals that are being hunted? What do we do about that? That's where it gets tough, Jackson admitted. The world is facing serious challenges, and it's easy to feel helpless. But the important thing to remember is that every action counts. Every person who cares, every person who takes action, makes a difference. And sometimes, even small changes in behavior can have a ripple effect. Sammy nodded, but he still didn't feel entirely convinced. But how can I, just one person, change anything? How can one person stop a forest from being cut down, or stop an animal from becoming endangered? Jackson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It's not about doing it alone, Sammy. It's about being part of a community of people who care, who work together. The more people who understand the importance of protecting nature, the more influence we have, and that influence can lead to real change. It's not just about stopping something bad. It's about supporting the good things, like preserving wildlife reserves, planting trees, reducing waste. All of these actions contribute to a healthier planet. Sammy sat in silence, considering Jackson's words. He was beginning to understand that protecting nature didn't require him to be a hero. It was about being part of something bigger, a movement that relied on the efforts of many, not just one. Thanks, Jackson, Sammy said after a moment. I think I get it now. It's not about doing everything, but doing something. It's about finding the little ways to make a difference, and hoping that those small things add up. Exactly, Jackson said, smiling. Every little bit counts, Sammy. And the more people who care, the more change we'll see. It's a long journey, but it's worth it. A few days later, Sammy's newfound understanding was put to the test when a local news story caught his attention. It was about a nearby forest reserve that was being threatened by a construction project. The developers wanted to clear a portion of the forest to build a new shopping center, and the plans were moving forward rapidly. Sammy's heart sank as he read the article. He knew that this forest was home to countless animals, some of which were endangered. The thought of losing it, of seeing the habitat destroyed, made him feel both angry and helpless. He immediately thought back to the conversation with Jackson. What could he do? Later that evening, as Sammy sat at the kitchen table with his mother, he brought up the issue. Mom, did you hear about the forest reserve? They're going to tear it down to build a shopping center. Laura looked up from her newspaper, her expression grim. I did hear about that. It's a shame. That's a precious ecosystem, and once it's gone, it's gone. I don't know what to do, Sammy said, frustration evident in his voice. It feels like everything's just happening too fast, like there's nothing we can do to stop it. Laura placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming, but remember what Jackson said. Every little bit counts. We can start by raising awareness. Maybe there's a petition we can sign or a protest we can join. But the important thing is that you're thinking about it. You're learning to care, and that's the first step. Sammy nodded, his resolve hardening. I'm going to do something. I'll talk to Jackson tomorrow, and we'll figure out what we can do. The next day, Sammy met with Jackson again, this time at the local park. Sammy shared the news about the construction project, and Jackson listened intently, nodding as he absorbed the information. I was thinking, Sammy began. Maybe we could start by organizing a petition. We could talk to people in the community, tell them about the importance of the forest, and how it's home to endangered species. We could get them to sign the petition, and maybe that would help convince the developers to reconsider. Jackson smiled. That's a great idea, Sammy. A petition is a powerful tool. But we can also go beyond that. We can organize a peaceful protest, maybe even hold an event where people can learn about the forest and its wildlife. The more people we get involved, the stronger our message will be. Sammy's eyes lit up. Yes, we can do that. We can bring the community together to fight for this forest. Jackson nodded. Exactly. It's not just about one person trying to stop something. It's about showing the developers that the community cares, that we're united in our efforts to protect this land. In the following weeks, Sammy and Jackson worked tirelessly to rally the community. They spread the word, spoke with local environmental groups, and gathered signatures for the petition. Word spread quickly, and soon, people from all over the area came to support their cause. The protest day arrived, and the park was filled with people, young and old, families and individuals, all standing together to protect the forest. Sammy felt a surge of hope as he looked around at the crowd. This was it. This was the kind of action he had wanted to take, something that could make a difference. The protest in the park had been a turning point for Sammy. What began as a small idea, starting a petition, had evolved into a full-scale campaign. The momentum was palpable, the energy contagious. People of all ages were showing up, signing petitions, and participating in peaceful demonstrations. Sammy felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. He had never imagined his small action could ignite such a powerful response from the community. It wasn't just the protest that had energized him, though. Sammy was witnessing firsthand the collective power of people who cared, people who were willing to stand up and speak for something larger than themselves. The idea that they could make a tangible difference, that their voices could reach those in positions of power, was becoming a reality. One morning, as Sammy was preparing for another day of activism, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from Erin, the park ranger who had become a mentor to him over the past few months. Her voice was calm but urgent. Sammy, I need you to come by the nature center as soon as possible. There's something we need to discuss. It's important. The sense of urgency in her tone made Sammy feel both concerned and curious. He quickly grabbed his jacket and headed for the nature center, wondering what could be so important. When he arrived, Erin was waiting for him outside. Her expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes that gave him some comfort. Hey, Erin, Sammy greeted her. What's going on? You sounded really serious on the phone. Erin led him inside the building, where a group of local environmental activists and concerned citizens were gathered around a large table. Several of them were holding papers and discussing something in hushed tones. Sammy's heart began to race as he realized this was a meeting about the forest project. "We've made a breakthrough," Erin said, her voice low but filled with determination. "The developers have agreed to sit down with us. They want to discuss the petition, the protest, and the concerns of the community. This is our chance to make a real impact." Sammy blinked, trying to process the information. "Wait, they actually want to meet with us?" "Yes," Erin confirmed, nodding. "But it's not going to be easy. They're not going to back down without a fight. We need to have a solid argument, backed by facts, to show them why this forest should be preserved. And we need to make sure they understand that it's not just about saving trees. It's about preserving an entire ecosystem. The wildlife, the plants, the soil, all of it is connected." Sammy nodded, his mind spinning. This was the moment he had been waiting for. But he knew it would take more than just passion and good intentions to win this battle. They needed a strategy, a plan that would resonate with the developers, the town council, and anyone else who held the power to make the final decision. Erin could see the doubt in Sammy's eyes and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've come so far already, Sammy," she said. "You've learned more about nature in a few months than most people do in their lifetime. You understand the value of this forest, and now we need to make sure that the people with the power to protect it understand that as well." Over the next few days, Sammy worked closely with Erin and the other environmental activists to gather as much information as possible. They researched the local wildlife, focusing on endangered species that called the forest home. They learned about the role of the forest in maintaining the region's ecological balance, its importance as a water filter, and its role in mitigating climate change. Sammy also reached out to biologists, environmental scientists, and other experts who could offer their insights and data to strengthen their case. Jackson, too, was involved in the preparations. As the day of the meeting approached, he helped Sammy fine-tune their arguments, making sure they were both scientific and compelling. Sammy was beginning to understand the weight of their mission. This wasn't just about stopping a construction project. It was about ensuring that future generations would have access to the same natural wonders he had grown up with. The night before the meeting, Sammy sat in his room, reviewing his notes. His mind raced as he considered the arguments they would present. He had learned so much over the past few months, but now it felt as if everything hinged on this one meeting. What if they weren't convincing enough? What if the developers decided that the profit they could make from the project was more important than preserving the forest? He shook off the doubts and reminded himself of all the reasons they were doing this. It wasn't just for him. It was for the animals that depended on the forest, for the plants that helped sustain life, for the balance that would be disrupted if this forest was lost. He thought back to that day in the forest when he and Jackson had released the skunk back into its home. Sammy had learned that day that nature was fragile and needed to be respected. Now, more than ever, he knew that this fight wasn't just about one forest. It was about protecting nature as a whole. The meeting day arrived. Sammy wore a button-up shirt and khakis, his usual casual attire swapped for something that felt more serious. He met Jackson, Erin, and the rest of the group at the Nature Center, where they would carpool to the town hall for the meeting with the developers. Sammy's nerves were running high, but Jackson gave him a reassuring smile as they drove. "You've got this, Sammy," Jackson said. "Just remember, you're speaking up for something that matters. You don't have to have all the answers. Just speak from the heart." When they arrived at the town hall, the group was greeted by the developers' team, who were all dressed in sharp suits. They looked like they meant business, and Sammy knew this was going to be a tough negotiation. The meeting room was large, filled with a long table and chairs on either side. Sammy took his seat among the group, his heart pounding in his chest. Erin stood at the front, ready to begin. "Thank you all for coming," Erin began. "We're here today to discuss the impact of the proposed construction project on the local environment. Specifically, we are concerned about the destruction of the forest, which houses numerous species of wildlife, some of which are endangered." Sammy watched the developers as Erin spoke. Their expressions were impassive, but he could tell they were listening. It was a start. As the meeting continued, Sammy found his voice. He stood up and shared his personal connection to the forest, how it had shaped his understanding of nature, how it had inspired him to learn more and to protect the environment. He spoke about the animals, the trees, the flowers, and the intricate web of life that depended on the forest. His voice was steady, but his words were filled with passion. When he finished, there was a long silence. Sammy held his breath, waiting for the response. One of the developers, a woman in her mid-40s, finally spoke. "We understand the concerns you've raised," she said, her tone neutral. "But we have plans in place to minimize the environmental impact of the project. We believe this development is in the best interest of the community. Jobs will be created, and the local economy will benefit. Erin responded, her voice calm but firm. We're not opposed to growth, but not at the cost of irreparably damaging our natural resources. This forest is a unique ecosystem, and once it's gone forever. The meeting continued for hours, with both sides presenting arguments, offering data, and discussing potential compromises. Sammy felt exhausted, but he knew they had made an impact. They had given their best effort, and they had spoken from the heart. He wasn't sure how it would end, but he felt proud of what they had accomplished. As they left the town hall, Erin put a hand on Sammy's shoulder. You did great, Sammy. I can't promise what the outcome will be, but we made our case, and that's what matters. Sammy smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that, win or lose, he had done everything he could. He had used his voice to speak for the forest, and that was something he would carry with him forever. The days following the meeting at Town Hall were filled with uncertainty. Sammy, Jackson, Erin, and the rest of the group knew that their work wasn't over. The developers hadn't made a decision yet, and they still had to wait for the outcome. But Sammy felt something in him had changed. Even though the future of the forest was still uncertain, he no longer saw himself as just a bystander in the world. He had found his voice, and he was ready to use it for the things he believed in. The next few days were filled with anticipation. Sammy continued his daily activities, but his thoughts often drifted back to the forest and the fight to protect it. He spoke to friends and family about the importance of preserving natural spaces. He even started a small blog where he shared his experiences and what he had learned about conservation. His passion for protecting nature had grown into a cause he couldn't ignore. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the call came. Sammy was sitting at the kitchen table, working on his homework, when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, seeing Erin's name. Hello? Sammy answered, his voice tentative. Sammy, it's Erin, she said, her voice excited. I've got some great news. Sammy's heart skipped a beat. What is it? Did they make a decision? Yes, Erin said. The developers have agreed to halt the construction project and preserve the forest. They've listened to the community, and they're going to work with us to ensure that the area remains protected. Sammy felt a surge of relief and joy wash over him. Wait, really? They're going to protect the forest? Yes, Sammy, it's official. The project is off the table and the forest will remain intact. The developers have agreed to collaborate with environmental organizations, including us, to ensure that the ecosystem is maintained and that any future development in the area is sustainable. Sammy could hardly believe it. He had fought for this, alongside the community, and now it was happening. The forest, the animals, the plants, the entire ecosystem would be safe. That's amazing! I can't believe it, Sammy said, his voice filled with excitement. This is everything we wanted. I know, Erin said, laughing. It's a huge victory, and you played an important role in making it happen, Sammy. Your passion and your voice helped convince people that this forest is worth saving. Sammy felt a warmth spread through him as he absorbed her words. He had always felt that nature was something worth protecting, but now he realized that his small actions had contributed to something much bigger. He wasn't just an observer, he was an active participant in creating positive change. The news quickly spread through the community. Sammy couldn't wait to share it with his family. When he told his mother, Laura, she immediately hugged him, her eyes brimming with tears of pride. I'm so proud of you, Sammy, she said, her voice choked with emotion. You didn't give up. You stood up for what you believed in, and look what you've accomplished. You've helped save something truly special. I couldn't have done it without all the people who supported me, Sammy replied, his voice filled with gratitude. It was the whole community working together. Everyone who signed the petition, joined the protest, and spoke out. They all made a difference. That evening, the town held a small celebration in the park to commemorate the victory. It was a peaceful gathering, filled with music, food, and laughter. The atmosphere was light and joyous, as everyone celebrated the successful preservation of the forest. Sammy stood beside Jackson, watching the community come together to celebrate. People were shaking hands, exchanging stories, and taking photos to remember the day. Sammy couldn't help but smile. He had learned so much over the past few months, but today, he felt like he had truly found his place in the world. You did good, Sammy, Jackson said, clapping him on the back. You've come a long way from the kid who thought a skunk was a toy. Sammy laughed. Yeah, I guess I've learned a lot since then. It's not just about learning facts, Jackson continued. It's about understanding the world and knowing how to protect it. You've got that now. You've got a voice, and you know how to use it. Sammy smiled, feeling a sense of purpose fill him. I do, don't I? As the evening wore on, people gathered around a bonfire, sharing stories of their own experiences with nature and their hopes for the future. Sammy joined in, telling his story of how he had come to care about the forest and what it had meant to him. People listened attentively, nodding in agreement as he spoke. At that moment, Sammy realized how far he had come. He had started as a boy who didn't fully understand the importance of nature, someone who thought animals were toys and plants were just decorations. But now, he understood that everything in the natural world was interconnected, and that it was his responsibility, and the responsibility of everyone, to protect it. He thought back to that first day in the woods, when he had tried to catch the skunk. He had no idea then how much that moment would change him, how it would open his eyes to the fragility of nature and the need to protect it. It had been the catalyst for everything that had come after. The petition, the protests, the victories. It was as if the forest had called to him, and he had answered. As the fire crackled and the night grew darker, Sammy stood up and took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill his lungs. The forest was safe, for now, but he knew that his work was far from over. There were always more forests to protect, more animals to save, and more people to educate. But Sammy felt ready. He had found his calling. Months passed and the forest remained untouched. The developers had kept their promise, and the area had become part of a larger conservation project, ensuring its protection for generations to come. Sammy continued to be an advocate for the environment, speaking at schools, organizing cleanup events, and working with local conservation groups. He was now a recognized figure in the community, not just for his activism, but for his deep understanding of the natural world. He had become a bridge between the younger generation and the older one, helping others see the importance of preserving nature for future generations. One afternoon, as Sammy sat by the same patch of wildflowers he had discovered months ago, he reflected on the journey he had taken. From the curious boy who wanted to catch a skunk to the passionate advocate who had saved a forest, Sammy had grown in ways he never could have imagined. He smiled to himself, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the gentle breeze in the trees. Nature had become a part of him, and he was determined to make sure it stayed that way. For himself, for others, and for the world. And in that moment, Sammy knew that the fight to protect nature would never truly end. But as long as there were people willing to listen, to learn, and to act, there would always be hope. The forest was safe, for now, and that was enough.